Imagine this. A man survives a war that lasted 10 years. But the real nightmare begins after the war is over. This is not a story about battles. It's a story about what happens when you try to go home, and the world no longer recognizes you. Today, on 25th Frame, we're breaking down the Odyssey, the upcoming film that may become the most ambitious project of modern cinema. Not just because of its scale, not because of its cast, and not because of its budget, but because this film is about identity, time, trauma, and the cost of survival. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Odyssey is not just another epic. It's a mirror pointed directly at us. Let's begin. The story that never died. More than 2,000 years ago, Homer wrote the Odyssey. On the surface, it looks like a simple myth, a warrior trying to get back home after a long war. But that's not the real story. And that's why it never stopped haunting humanity. Here's the part most people miss. Odysseus is not trying to win. He already won the war. He's trying to survive what came after it. He's trying to remember who he was before violence became normal, before loss reshaped him, before he learned how easily a man can turn into a stranger to himself. The real enemy of the Odyssey is not Cyclops, not sirens, not gods. It's time. It's distance. Distance between the man who left and the man who is trying to return. That's why this story refuses to die. Because every generation recognizes itself inside it. Soldiers returning from war, realizing home feels smaller than they remembered. People coming back from burnout, depression, or obsession, unsure how they lost themselves along the way. Men and women returning to relationships that still exist, but no longer feel like home. People standing in familiar places, feeling like intruders in their own lives. The Odyssey understands a terrifying truth. You can survive everything and still lose yourself. Odysseus is not fighting monsters to get home. He's fighting the fear that home no longer exists. Because the version of him who belonged there is gone. This is not a story about adventure. It's a story about identity. About what happens when life changes you so deeply that returning becomes harder than leaving. The Odyssey is not about monsters. It's about the space between who you were and who you became. And that distance is the longest journey a human being can make. Why this film matters now. So why adapt the Odyssey now? Why bring back a story that's over 2,000 years old in an era of algorithms, AI, burnout, and infinite content? Because we live in the age of endless wandering. We scroll without stopping. We work without borders. We chase success, meaning, validation, without pause. Always moving, always consuming, always almost there. And yet, beneath all of it, the same quiet question keeps surfacing. Where is home? Not a location on a map, not a city, not even another person. Home is a state of being, a place inside yourself where things feel aligned, where you recognize who you are, where you don't need to perform, prove, or escape. And that's exactly why this film arrives now. Because people are tired, disconnected, fragmented, burned out not just from work, but from becoming versions of themselves they don't fully recognize anymore. We live in a time where returning feels harder than leaving, where people aren't sure if they even want to go back, or if there's anything left to return to. That's why the Odyssey isn't nostalgia. It's not about ancient heroes or dusty myths. It's a diagnosis, a story about what happens to the human psyche when the journey lasts too long, when survival replaces identity, and when coming home means confronting the person you've become. This film isn't asking, how do you defeat the monster? It's asking something far more uncomfortable. Who are you after everything you've been through? And are you brave enough to face that answer? Odysseus, a hero who is already broken. Traditional heroes chase victory. They want trophies, crowns, applause. Odysseus doesn't, because by the time the Odyssey begins, he already won the war. Troy is destroyed. His enemies are dead. History should remember him as a legend. But victory did not save him. It hollowed him out. Every island he lands on offers the same deal, in different forms. Forget the war, forget the blood, forget who you were. Stay here, rest, become someone simpler. With Calypso, he can be immortal. With Circe, he can be powerful. With the Lotus Eaters, he can stop feeling altogether. And every time, Odysseus refuses. Not because he's noble, not because he's strong, but because he understands something terrifying. If he forgets his pain, he also forgets his meaning. Forgetting would not be relief, it would be erasure. That's the real bravery of Odysseus, not fighting monsters, but refusing comfort that costs him his identity. And that's why this story still hurts. Because today, the greatest temptation isn't danger, it's comfort, distraction. The offer to stop remembering who you used to be.
The real villains of the Odyssey. Let's get this straight. The Cyclops is not the villain. Circe is not the villain. The sirens are not the villain. Not even the gods. Those are obstacles. The real enemy is quieter. It's identity erosion. Every stop on Odysseus's journey takes something from him. First, his crew. Men who shared his past and remembered who he was. Then his confidence. Each mistake costs lives. Then his morality. Survival starts demanding uglier choices. Then his certainty about gods, justice, and whether the journey even has a point. Until Odysseus is stripped down to one unbearable question. If I survive, who exactly is coming back? That question hits harder today than ever. Because modern life does the same thing slowly. Jobs remove years. Burnout removes empathy. Trauma removes clarity. Success removes simplicity. And one day, people wake up asking, I'm still alive, but where did I go? The Odyssey isn't about external danger. It's about losing yourself one compromise at a time. Penelope, the most underrated character. Penelope is often described as the woman who waits. That description misses everything. Penelope does not wait. She holds the line. While Odysseus fights monsters, Penelope fights time, pressure, and inevitability. She is surrounded by suitors, by voices telling her to move on, by a world that assumes Odysseus is already dead. And instead of collapsing, she strategizes. She delays. She lies. She outsmarts every man in the room, because she understands something Odysseus cannot afford to forget. If the world moves on without him, then returning becomes meaningless. Penelope is the anchor of the story. While Odysseus struggles to return physically, she preserves the idea of home, not the house, not the marriage contract, the meaning. If she gives up hope, Odysseus doesn't just lose a wife, he loses the reason to survive the journey. This is not passive love. This is resistance. This is loyalty as an act of intelligence. And in a world obsessed with constant movement, Penelope represents something radical, the courage to stay, so that someone else has somewhere worth returning to. The psychology of the journey. Here's the uncomfortable truth most stories avoid. People don't usually fail because they can't reach the goal. They fail because by the time they get there, they no longer recognize who they've become. The Odyssey understands this with brutal clarity. The longer Odysseus is away from home, the more dangerous the idea of home becomes. Because home is not just a reward. Home is a mirror. And mirrors are terrifying when you're no longer sure what you'll see. That's why this story isn't about distance in miles. It's about distance in identity. Every year, Odysseus spends wandering. Every loss, every compromise, every moral shortcut pushes him further away from the man who left Ithaca. And eventually, something breaks. Not his body, his certainty. The Odyssey shows us a truth that still hurts today. The longer the journey, the harder it is to believe you still deserve to return. That's why Odysseus doesn't come home as a hero. He comes home disguised, scarred, silent, unrecognizable, because survival alone is not enough. Home doesn't just ask, "Did you make it?" It asks something far more dangerous. Do you still belong here? And that question destroys more people than any monster ever could. Why this will be a modern masterpiece. This adaptation of the Odyssey is not about spectacle, not about monsters, not about gods, not about epic battles at sea. It's about interior collapse, about what happens after the war ends, when the noise stops, when the adrenaline fades, and you're left alone with who you've become. Odysseus doesn't just return from Troy. He returns carrying the war inside him, the violence, the guilt, the compromises he had to make to survive. This is not a hero's journey in the traditional sense. It's a psychological reckoning. A man slowly realizing that the war didn't end on the battlefield. It followed him into every decision, every relationship, every version of himself he tried to become along the way. And that's why this story feels urgent now. We live in a world where leaving is easy, where reinventing yourself is encouraged, where running forward is praised. But returning is rare. Returning is painful. Returning forces accountability. This film, if done right, won't comfort the audience. It will unsettle them, because it asks a question most people avoid at all costs. If you finally went back to the life you wanted, would it still want you? The Odyssey is not a journey across seas. It's a journey through identity, through memory, through loss. It's about what we sacrifice just to survive, and whether survival alone is enough to call it victory. It's about the terrifying possibility that you can make it through everything and still lose yourself along the way. And maybe that's why this story has survived for thousands of years. Because deep down, we recognize it. We are all Odysseus now, wandering, adapting, compromising, trying to remember who we were before the journey changed us, and hoping quietly that something like home still exists. If this breakdown made you rethink the story, leave a like. If you want us to go deeper into a specific character, theme, or moment, write it in the comments. This was 25th Frame, And remember, sometimes the hardest journey isn't forward. It's back to yourself.